Hey, welcome you all for today's podcast on succession planning. Today we have Dr. Nivedita Srivastava with us. She is founder of Nine Links and a fellow of IIM Mumbai. She has 20 years of experience in psychometric assessments and organizational development. Yes. Hi, Nivedita.
Hi, Arva. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much.
Okay. So today we'll discuss about succession planning's 5 key points. So yes, Nivedita, can you briefly explain us why succession planning is important?
Right. This is an area as succession planning which will always be very relevant, irrespective of what era of the industry we are. Right. I would like to give a very simple example out here, wherein an organization could be viewed more as a kingdom, right? So when there is a king that's retiring, right? The intent of the king is to create legacy in the kingdom. Similarly, when we talk about an organization as relevant to a kingdom, it's important for an organization to also create legacy, right?
Right.
So that's how, and that's why succession planning becomes very relevant for any organization. And I think that's just creating a talent pool which will take over the organization as a kingdom and for the future generations that will work in the same organization.
That is a really nice analogy to give. That explains a lot. So tell us how to go about succession planning for organizations that are fairly new in the industry, like startups and everything. So how to go about succession planning? How to start?
Sure. So while succession planning can appear to be a very expensive process, right? And similarly, again, it can appear to be very time taking as well. So yes, there are certain conditions that apply to the process of succession planning. It may not necessarily be very expensive and very time consuming, but yes, there is a cost that's associated with it, and there is an investment of time that's associated with it. Depends largely on the size of the organization.
Okay.
uh, so going forward to your second question, which was about the process of succession planning, I think the most important stage of succession planning is competency mapping, right? Wherein it's imperative to understand what are those critical competencies that are relevant to a specific organization, also depending on what are the levels that we are talking about and what is the organization culture. So that's the most important parameter, I would rather say, or the first stage of initiating the process of succession planning. Second, going forward, is deciding on various tools that can help an organization in succession planning. So that's the second stage. There can be a plethora of assessment tools which can put people on an assessment trail, I would rather say. These could include psychometric assessments, or these could include case study analysis, or simulation exercises, depending on what parameters or what competencies that the test is, or rather or on the skills and the competencies that the organization focuses on, right? And the third stage that I understand is to ensure that there's ample objectivity in the whole process of succession planning. So these are the three stages, as I understand, and as I would want to share with the audience, of the process of succession planning.
Right. Great. Yes. So as we do the succession planning, while doing that, what are the key traits of effective leadership that we should analyze?
Right. So, while as earlier we just discussed, Arva, that succession planning is something that's relevant for all levels and all functions, in an organization. It's often a myth that succession planning is only relevant to the leadership level, right? However, I would want to clarify out here that succession planning is all about identifying talent. So, it applies to any role wherein you need to create a legacy or a talent pool who can take over as a next level, right, as next in line, right? So something that I think is very relevant, because ultimately at the end of the day, organizations are viewed viewed as, the success of an organization is viewed in parameters of profit and loss, right?
Right.
So one key parameter that will remain constant irrespective of, again, what era of corporate or industry we are talking about, is business acumen, right?
Right.
That a leader or somebody who is going to take up the next important or critical role should have a sufficient, should have an extensive uh, level of business acumen, right? So that I think is most relevant, uh, and will always be relevant, right? uh, and the second parameter that I think is most relevant or is very relevant in the current times is resilience. Let's just go back 2 years, 3 years back, right? We all had to face several challenges because of the pandemic. Something that really created a difference between an effective talent and not so effective talent, right? I never prefer calling people as ineffective. So not so effective talent was resilience. How successfully could people bounce back and again perform well, or how successfully could organizations perform well and again bounce back on the feet? So resilience is something uh, that is very important in the current times. Given the turbulent times we all face, various challenges, in terms of recession, right? Again, these are certain challenges that the corporates have been facing for almost several decades now. There's never a stage of stability. So resilience becomes very important. And the third, which again is one of the very critical traits, is empathy, right? Given, again, going back to the same analogy that we just spoke about a few minutes back, was about pandemic, right? Or for that matter, recession. So it's very important for any manager or any leader or any talent to be empathetic with their peers, or with their the next in level, the level down for that matter, right? So being empathetic is something that's very, very critical, and that's a humanitarian competency that I think stands out very critical when we talk about effective traits of a leader or of a manager for that matter. So I think just to put together all these three, or just to enumerate them, business acumen, resilience, empathy would be one of the top three critical competencies amongst many, many others. So it's a composite whole. But yes, if I have to really stand, make these make a list of the top three, so these would stand out.
Great. So can you tell us the three mantras that you would tell the HRs for succession planning?
Well, just by putting these three mantras, I think one of the top one is, or one of the most important one again, is uh, objectivity, right? So the process of succession planning has to be process driven rather than people driven. So who's driving the process of succession planning should not be so relevant. Leaders change, the heads of organizations change. That should really not be a determinant in the success of the whole process of succession planning or the failure of the same, right? Organizations really need to get into the objectivity of succession planning. So again, going back to what I just said, that the process has to be process driven rather than people driven. And again, yes, investment into the mapping of competencies, identifying those competencies which are critical to your organization, rather than following generic competencies. Every organization has certain focus areas. So I think identifying those critical competencies that are relevant to your organization culture is the second mantra that I would see. And yes, the third is objectivity, which is where it's important to have several people assessing a pool rather than just the senior head or the business owner deciding as to who should be leading or be next in line. It should be a very objective process wherein organizations, of course, big or small, could engage external consultants or should engage people who are objective about the process and objective in assessing the talent pool. That's where I think objectivity, identifying competencies, and process driven remain the three mantras of the process of succession planning.
Yeah, true. Completely agree with that. The a company should have that much faith on the consultants to keep it process driven rather than people driven, is what I
Yeah.
think, right? Yeah. Okay. So, Nivedita, can you share with us one instance or experience that you had while all the years that you were in this industry around succession planning?
Sure. Well, actually, I have had varied experiences of working with both large scale organizations and medium scale organizations as well. And yes, a lot depends. Typically, we can say that large organizations, many times or most of the time, are pretty process driven because it's not really run by the business owner for that matter, which is not the case with a medium or a small scale organization, wherein the business owner is typically the decision maker. So that's actually a message that I would also want to give out to medium and small scale organizations to invest into succession planning as an objective process, which is where that element of objectivity that we just spoke about is very relevant. And not really deciding on one's subjective experiences or personal biases in deciding on the talent pool, which is not really the case when it comes to large scale organizations, as we just spoke about, that it is not the business owner who is really deciding on the talent pool. Because, of course, once let's just go back to the same analogy that when a kingdom is so widespread across countries and nations, the same king who's the who's the ruler across various nations, right,
Right.
cannot decide on the next in line across geographies, right? Which typically happens in a medium or a small scale organization. But yes, it's important for even business owners of medium and small scale organizations to invest into succession planning as an objective process. So I think that would resolve several challenges and several hurdles uh, in running the organization in a much more objective and a much more process driven manner.
Yeah, right. Great. Yes, Nivedita, audience must have gained valuable insights from this podcast. Thank you for joining in. You guys, stay tuned for our next series of podcast with Nivedita on various aspects of organizational development. Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye bye.